All right, so welcome everybody to our first GCP workshop for 2025. Our speaker today is Doran Triggs. She is our Quality and Compliance Manager in the Stanford Center for Clinical Research. And again, my name is Kira. I'm the person who's responsible for these courses and classes and facilitating these opportunities for not only SCCR, but really anybody who is interested in learning about these topics. Almost all of our classes are open to anyone in the School of Medicine. We also are happy to collaborate with our hospital colleagues. So let other people know, let colleagues know that these classes are available. The ones that we have planned for 2025 so far are up on the SCCR website. So please take a look at future topics that we already have confirmed. And in the meantime, I'm working on the remainder of the calendar for 2025. But there are registration links for those courses on our website, and I will put that link in the chat as well. I do see one question before we get going from Barb. Where will we be able to see the recording? So the list of the recordings is at the bottom of each page where the science series and GCP workshops are, and it just says past recordings. So I'll put that link and an explanation in the chat as well. And you can go to the past classes as well as those recordings. All right. Well, Doran, I will turn it over to you unless anybody has any other questions for me. All right.
Awesome.
Doran's going to talk to us about the importance of the trial master files today. So go ahead, Doran.
Awesome. Thank you, Kira, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today's session, and thanks for your flexibility and having to reschedule.
Oh, yes.
Appreciate it. Oh, is there a question?
I went ahead and just muted her. I think it was probably an error.
Okay. Like Kira said, my name is Doran. I work with SCCR and our quality and compliance team, doing monitoring for our studies and then some studies outside of our department as well, reviewing data, reviewing regulatory documents for sites to make sure they're in compliance with the protocol and regulations as well. So TMF is something, regulatory in general is something I'm passionate about. It ensures the safety of the trials and ensures that the work that we're doing, is clean and is reliable. So the TMF is a huge part of that. So today we'll walk through what a TMF is, why is it essential, how proper preparation and maintenance can support inspection readiness and overall trial success. And please stop me along the way if you have any questions. I want it to be more of an interactive, session and be able to give you, the knowledge or information that you need to walk away to feel like you have a better understanding of the TMF and what it's all about. So today we'll go over some definitions. We'll start with a quick quiz to kind of check where we are and give you guys a sense of, what the presentation is going to be about and things to think about. We'll go over the TMF reference models, where to find examples of how to create your TMF, the requirements, and again, preparation and maintenance of your trial master files, and then how to be ready for inspections, and then some common errors I see as a monitor with sites in their regulatory documents. Okay, so if you can just put your answer in the chat, we'll go through the questions, I'll read it, and then you can just give, I believe it, oh, awesome. Okay. It looks like we have the poll up as well, so you can answer there, but I'll go through the questions and then I'll give the answer right after, and then we can see all of the results at the end. Does that work fine, Kira?
We'll give it a go. I
Oh,
actually use polls very often in Zoom, so I'm kind of a new person to this, so I hope it works okay. I do see the answers coming in, so
oh,
um,
perfect.
take
Okay.
take a couple minutes to go through these 5 questions, and then
Yeah,
I can show the results once everybody is done.
perfect. I think that may be enough time. Do we have a good amount of answers in?
They are rolling in. We have 18 of 30 so
Okay,
far, so maybe another 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and then we'll get everybody in.
sounds good.
Yeah, give folks just 20 more seconds and I'll close the poll. I'm going to close it now.
Perfect.
You guys see the poll results?
Yes, yeah.
Great.
Awesome. So we'll go through the answers really quickly. So the first one was which of the following are a part of the TMF? And the correct answer was all of the above. It looks like 86. Most of you got it correct, and this one's kind of tricky, and we'll get into the different terminology that's used when talking about the TMF. There's they each, mean their own thing, but sometimes they can go um, hand in hand or be used interchangeably. So we'll talk about that. So the answer was E. When should the TMF be established? And it looks like we all got that question correct. Amazing. At the beginning of the trial. So, preferably in your study startup phase, all those documents that you're creating and getting together will be placed in those folders. And we'll talk about how to prepare for that as well. But I just want to um, kind of point that out. I feel like sometimes we see a lot people having to create their TMFs like right before the monitor comes, which can be really stressful for the site. So if the sponsor has a TMF, the site does not need one. And we all got that one correct as well. That is definitely false. While they help you maintain, if you have a good sponsor, you definitely need your own. Which of the following does not belong in a regulatory binder? And most of us got the correct answer, which is B. So, regulatory binder is a part of the TMF, and it should not have PHI in it. And we'll go in depth with that in a little bit. But B is the correct answer. And the final question, when is it okay to destroy trial essential documents? And the correct answer is C, and we got that mostly right as well. So at least 2 to 4 years after completion of the trial and regulatory approval, Most of the time, some sponsors will kind of give you a timeline. The policy at Stanford, I believe, is 4 years to keep those documents stored as well. Awesome. Thanks so much, Kira. Overall, we did great. So hopefully you'll learn, a little bit more outside of what you already know today. So we'll start off with definitions, the trial master file or the TMF. And nowadays we all have electronic trial master files. Is the collection of essential documents used by the sponsor, CROs, investigators, and the sites to manage a clinical trial. It allows regulators, monitors, auditors to verify that the trial was conducted according to GCP and regulatory requirements. Essential documents permit the evaluation of the trial's conduct and the quality of the data that's produced. This includes both trial-specific documents and non-trial specific documents in the essential documents. And all of these documents tell a story. It tells a story of the trial, what was done, how it was conducted, who was involved. One of the most critical elements of any research is proper documentation. We want to make sure that our documents tell the story from beginning to end and also fits with applicable regulatory requirements and what's written in the protocol. So to be able to reproduce like, hey, this is what we did when an auditor asks, whether that be a CRF, a physician's note, all of those things are really essential in retelling the trial and what you did and sharing your amazing work. So the TMF is usually composed of a sponsor TMF that's held by the sponsor organization, and then there's a site TMF or investigator TMF, which the site is responsible for. The investigator TMF is often referred to as an ISF or a investigator site file. So sometimes people use TMF, sometimes people use ISF, but those truly are the same for the investigator, but there's also a TMF on the sponsor side. If you are a investigator initiated trial and you don't have an outside CRO or sponsor, you are the investigator and the sponsor. So both of those things are one and the same. So the TMF is the ISF for you. And then here's just a little visual, which helps me a lot. So for if it's a sponsored trial, the TMFs is all the essential documents. So that's trial documents and non-trial documents, and we'll go through some of those here in a little bit. And then there's a sponsored TMF, and then there's the ISF, which are the files at the site. The ISF comprises of a regulatory binder where you keep all of your regulatory documents that should not have PHI in them. And then you have a separate subject binders that contain the CRFs, the visit notes, whether that's electronic or it's in paper. Those two things should be separated. And then the subject binder should be somewhere that's PHI safe if it's in a folder and inbox. And then only people who need access should have access to it. And it should be, if it's on paper, it should be somewhere locked and safe. The sponsor TMF is usually held by the sponsor and is mostly study level documents. If it's a multi-site trial, they'll have, one big TMF set up on their end and sometimes require sites to upload to their TMF. And you could also find, study-wide documents there too, like an ICF template or an ops manual or something like that, they'll have that set up for you to kind of always reference when you need it in other sites. So again, if it is a IIT, so you are the sponsor and the investigator, the TMF and the ISF, it's the same. It's all the essential documents for the trial. So you'll have your regulatory binder, which will comprise like all of your regulatory documents at a study level and even at a site level, if you're managing multiple sites. And the investigator-initiated trials that I work in, if they're multi-site, we'll have two separate regulatory binders. So one for like our side that has contracts and different things like that that the sites don't necessarily need access to. And then we'll have a regulatory binder that has site essential documents that they can reference as well. But again, these are all comprised into one TMF. And then the subject binder is also a part of that, that the study team works with to put all of your patient data in. Why is the TMF so important? So the TMF is required to allow reconstruction of the conduct of a trial. Again, it tells the story of what you did from the beginning to the end. It allows regulatory auditors to be able to review and verify that the patient's rights were protected, GCP was followed, and the data was collected and analyzed and reported as part of a clinical trial and is reproducible and of high quality. So the success of every trial is dependent on the reliability and the quality of the data collected. So the TMF is really important if it's kind of all over the place and you have documents in different folders and different binders, and it's not, um, you're not able to reproduce that or reconstruct your study. It's very hard to back up, the work you've done. It becomes harder to keep up with things like AEs or reporting and making sure you report those things. Just having all of that in one place is very important for reliability and quality of the study. The most comprehensive TMF guidance and regulation is in ICH E6 R2 GCP. It's in section 8, and it gives you a list of what documents are needed, and it's pretty comprehensive. It was published, and R2 was published in August 2018, and that is what is effective as of now. But there is a new ICH E6 R3 that is coming out. It was adopted on the 6th of last month and is set to be effective January or July 23rd of this year. And they have updated this section to be a little bit more detailed, and they changed the formatting a little bit. So instead of in section 8, it'll be in its own appendix. So I would definitely recommend checking out the new essential documents in new E6R3, but also just kind of using both for reference, I would say. And then this is just a closer look of what that looks like right now. So they give you the title of the documents and they break it down between, the different phases of the study, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But they give you the title of the document you need, the purpose, why that document's important and why you need to have it in your binder, and then the location of the file. So if it's supposed to be something that's stored in the investigator or at the site level, and then something the sponsor is responsible for maintaining. And again, if you're an investigator-initiated trials, like we have a lot at Stanford, you're responsible for both of them for all of the documents. Please stop me if there's any questions. Um, more reference models. Again, the link for R2 is here, and then E6R3 will replace that once it is made effective in July. The TMF reference model from DIA is the Drug Information Association. They also put a reference model together that is very thorough, and you can find it at this website. Um, and they keep it up to date too. And at SCCR, in our study startup SOP, we have a essential documents table of contents, which tells our sites what documents need to be or are required to be in their folders, and that's based off of both of these reference models. So, everyone's TMF can look different based on what type of study you're conducting. So I would go through and, make sure you have the ones that are required for ICE or E6 R2, and then kind of go through the TMF reference model that gives you a little bit more um, information or other documents that may not be included in E6R2, which we'll get into in a second. General requirements for the TMF1. As we learned in the question, which everyone knew, the TMF should be established at the beginning of any trial, both at the site and at the sponsor level. The TMF is required for every trial ran to GCP standards, which should just be every human trial. So I think a lot of the times studies are like, oh, we're only collecting like a survey, or we're only, we have like one visit day or something like that, and you think it's really not as important or not needed, but every trial needs to have a TMF. Again, it allows for the reconstruction of the study activity. So what you've done, even if you've collected all these surveys, you have no way to show um, who did it at what time, have the surveys, who entered. So things like that are still super important and need to be documented all in one place. Any alterations to content of the TMF should be traceable. That's made a lot easier by electronic TMF. So Box has version control, and it shows when things are edited. But if you're doing paper, it's really important to make sure you keep all versions of any documentation that's in your study conduct, any whether it's like a sticky note that you wrote a patient's blood pressure on, like everything should be in your binder and traceable as well. So if you're making a change to a CRF, making sure you initial and date that as well. So again, being able to tell the full story of your documentation. A final closeout of a trial can only be done when a monitor has reviewed both the sponsor and the investigator's eTMF and confirms that all necessary documents are filed appropriately. So make sure before you close out your IRBs that you have approval from the sponsor, that all of your documents are together and they're appropriate. And then if you're an IIT, make sure you do an internal review before you close out the trial and your staff is no longer working on the study, to make sure all of your regulatory documents are good to go. Documents, again, should be maintained for a period of at least 2 years. Stanford, I think the requirement's 4, and you should definitely verify with your sponsor what their timelines are for retaining those documents. And then lastly, any or all documents should be available for auditors by the sponsor's auditor and inspections by any regulatory agency. So if the FDA comes or Stanford monitor sponsor comes, those documents should be available. And that's made easy by, again, keeping a well-organized TMF regulatory documents and your subject binders, making sure that you're able to produce those in a timely manner. Awesome. So next we'll go over the 3 stages of the TMF. So again, we want to create that TMF before the trial starts. And then during the trial, you'll continue to maintain and update that as the study goes on. And then after and completion of the trial, those final steps and documents to close out the trial, we want to also make sure we do that properly. So we're going to look at what a site needs to document, but also remember that the trial sponsor will also need to keep documents as well. So first we'll go over, and this is from ICH E6 guidance, and this is how it's broken down in the template that I showed you guys earlier. So before the trial, these are documents that are generally created and collected by the sponsor and the investigator. So things like an investigator brochure, if you're doing a drug study, the protocol and CRFs are usually given to the sites by the sponsor, and those templates and things should be held by the sponsor. Master ICFs, subject materials and advertisements, all those things that the sponsor creates and then hands to the sites should be captured in there. And this is the list that's pulled directly from ICH as well, that are required. And then for the investigator, protocol signature page, so making sure that the investigator signs off on agreeing to conduct the study according to the protocol, something you should do before you start implementing that protocol. Making sure you have your site-specific ICFs approved and everything is filed, any IRB approval documents, and local documents. And then in the binder, I would also recommend having some of the sponsor required documents in your binder as well, like the IB needs to be signed by the investigator as well. So you'll have a copy of that in your folder. Central laboratory manuals and things like that should also be in your folder if you have to do anything with them for the study as well. And important to get everyone's CVs and qualifications prior to starting the study, and training logs and certifications as well. And again, an investigator-initiated trial should include all of these documents because you are the sponsor and the investigator. So you're responsible for all documents. And then during the trial, there's documents that are updated or created later in the study life. So any updates to documents should be in the sponsor if it's at a study level, continued approval at a health authority level. So FDA approval documents will be held by the sponsor, or if you're an investigator who's also the sponsor, you're responsible for keeping all of those documents, any communication with the FDA in a neat place, any communication to be able to reproduce that when needed. Monitoring visit reports at a sponsor level, any communication at a sponsor level as well. And then if CRFs are updated, keeping all the versions of those different CRFs as well. And then on an investigator side, any signature pages for updated documents. So if a new protocol comes out, making sure you keep each one of those signature pages and they're signed before you conduct any research. Continued IRB approval at a site level. These documents usually the sponsor requests for you to send, but you also still need to maintain those for your records on site as well. CVs, they should be updated every 2 years is our rule at SCCR. So making sure that there is CVs for every 2 years for all participants. Any new PIs, not participants, sorry, any new staff. So any new PIs or um, co-investigators, study staff coming on, making sure that those are documented. And then a lot of sites kind of forget about this when staff is transitioning off studies as well. So just making sure that that is up to date is really important so we don't miss those documents before someone leaves. All monitoring documents you gather throughout the study, logs, reports, any communication, um, subject logs, subject signed ICFs. Again, these are things that would be kept in that subject binder, especially things that have PHI on them. And things like monitoring reports and CVs will be kept in that regulatory binder, along with updated training. Um, SAE documents are usually in subject binder, all of these too. So rule of thumb, if it has PHI, it should be in the subject binder. And then after the trial completes, or before the trial completes, at completion of the trial, the sponsor will make sure that they have all of this clinical study reports, anything again submitted to the IRB FDA, um, audit certificates, final closeout monitoring report, and then drug allocation. So sending drug back, all of that, all of shipping and all of those documents should be kept in your TMF. And then for the investigator, the final report from your IRB, approval closure, study code lists, so we can, be able to reconstruct the study and tell what patients were who. Final drug accountability documents, so documenting drugs that were destroyed or devices that were returned on your end to send to the sponsor. Um, and then making sure that you handle the tissue and fluid samples that you may have collected throughout the study, rather that be shipping them off to the sponsor or discarding of them or whatever is going to happen at the end of the study. It's important to have record of that as well. Awesome. Do you have any questions? All right. So the ICHGCP list is pretty comprehensive, but it still is missing some documents. Like if you notice things like the DOA wasn't on that list, and we'll get into why that is here in a bit. And we can look at some examples of regulations and associated documents. So in ICH E6, it is, a general guidance on conducting research. And among the guidance, there's certain things that we are required to do. And from that, in order to be in compliance, things like the DOA were created in order um, to meet these guidelines. So while it's not necessarily like on the list in ICHE6, it's something that the research community created in order to be able to fulfill these requirements. So, for example, E6 says investigators are required to maintain a list of appropriately qualified persons to whom significant trial-related duties have been delegated. So that's where the delegation law came into place. You're allowed or you're able to document who's on the trial, when they were on the trial, what duties they have, and their role. And then it shows that the people who are in the specific roles during their duties, it verifies that they are qualified. And you can see that in the DOA and the 1572 as well, where you list those PIs and the sub-Is in that document. Another example, E6 is written SOPs for compliance with the protocol, GCP, and other applicable regulatory requirements. Trial conduct. The trial should be conducted in compliance with the SOPs. Data should be generated, recorded, and reported in compliance, and investigators must document and explain any deviations from the protocol. So that's why we have SOPs, to guide us. It's required for compliance and to make sure that we are meeting regulatory requirements, things like lab manuals or ops manuals to make sure that we're recording data or to explain how we recorded data, rather that be, paper versus direct data entry. So something that shows why and how we conducted the study, work instructions, guidelines, and then also PD documentation, PD logs. I feel like that's something that's kind of overlooked as well, but it's required that investigators explain and give reason why any deviation from the protocol happened. And then prompt review of all information relevant to safety of the drug obtained or otherwise received by the sponsor, including from any clinical investigation. So it's required that we promptly address any safety drug issues, AEs, any major events that happen. So the safety monitoring committee, was created to kind of fulfill that role, to be able to have oversight promptly of any events that occur, charters to explain how that committee is going to conduct and be able to review those promptly. And then we have meeting minutes for those committees to show and be able to reconstruct why certain decisions were made, and to show that it was reviewed promptly as well. Okay. And a few more. They require adequate measures to be taken to minimize bias on patients or subjects, and the analysts of the data. So having an unblinding plan, if anything happens that it needs to be unblinded, to show how we went about doing that without putting subject bias or study bias at risk. A randomization plan, again, randomization is part of research to eliminate bias as well. So that's something that was implemented to test our studies, but also to meet this requirement as well. And then plan analysis and methods should be created. So we have data management plans and analysis plans, so we can successfully conduct our studies and recreate, kind of why we did what we did and what the end result means. And then I feel like this is one that a lot of people like kind of overlooks, especially because it's not on that list, but it is a big finding again in a lot of audits. You have to ensure that financial interests is documented for any clinical investigator that could affect reliability of the data submitted to the FDA. So a financial disclosure form is required, and we have a template at SCCR. I believe there's a School of Medicine template, but if you need one, please let us know. It's documented in the IRB. I think there's a form, but we have one as well, that is from the NIH template, I believe, that just kind of, double down on making sure these requirements are met. So if you don't have a financial disclosure form for your study, no matter what kind of study it is, I would still make sure that's something that you have in your regulatory files. Chris, that's a great question. He asked, could you print the form from the IRB as proof of financial disclosure? So that depends on your study. If it's a sponsored trial, usually they have a required financial disclosure form that you have to sign for investigator-initiated trials. If it's an FDA regulated study or an IND, IDE, I would use a template NIH or the SCCR one that we created to be able to reproduce that. That's usually the way, auditors or FDA receive it or review that data. If it's a non-IND, IDE study, I would say that it's not as crucial to have that in-depth document, and the IRB obligations, I think is what it's called, obligation confirmation or something. It should be fine if you print it and make sure you save it in your folder. And then also with the financial disclosure form, I just want to point out that it should be updated when I think some sponsors do it like yearly, they require it, or every 2 years. Some do it at the beginning and the end of the trial or at continuing review. I believe with the IRB, they have to do it after every submission or something like that. But just making sure that those are up to date. If the PI changes, making sure that that's documented in all of the FDFs as well. Awesome. So next we'll go into preparation and maintenance of the TMF. And we're going to outline the arrangements of the TMF in detail. So first you want to make sure you plan where the TMF will be located, whether that's in a paper binder or if it's electronically stored somewhere. Again, today we most likely have an electronic TMF. If you're working on the older trial that's been running for a long time, I get a lot of questions about switching to an electronic TMF. Or like, what do I do with my paper TMF after I uploaded or switch to electronic? And the answer I usually give if it's a trial that's been going on for a really long time, the TMF is huge, I would recommend that you just keep it in a paper form. It's going to save you a lot of time. Not having to upload it, but it's also going to be easier for you to reproduce those documents if it's all in one place. I find a lot of the times when sites, try to switch over, they end up having like some things are paper or some things are electronic. And then it's hard to kind of find where things are. But if, you really want to move some things electronic, like sometimes sponsors have like 30 versions of the protocol and you don't want to continue to print that out going forward. And you still have to maintain those paper documents. So what we recommend is having some kind of note to file that says where those documents are located. So if we're going to start from version 5 of the protocol, uploading them electronically. After version 4, you'll have a note to file that says all of the document or all of the protocols starting this date will be located in this folder or this eTMF place. So that way, if an auditor is going through and they are looking for protocol 7, they know that it needs to be requested or they need to get access to it electronically. I hope that made sense. Define the TMF filing structure. Again, we have a table of contents guide that we use, but every TMF that you have should have a table of contents. So it's going to break it down by folder and then what files are in those folders. So when someone comes in, they can, follow that table of contents, and it also makes it easier for you guys to be able to file those documents. And you should have a table of contents for paper binders as well as electronic folders. Um, and again, I would use the E6 kind of table maybe to structure. The other TMF reference guide that I mentioned before has a nice structure as well if you don't use an already templated table of contents. Um, Make arrangements for clear governance and oversight of your TMF. So, I recommend having one or two people who are in charge of making sure those documents are filed. I feel like a lot of the times it kind of gets overlooked if you don't have someone like explicitly in charge of those documents. Because one person thinks that I'm uploading the documents and I think you're uploading the documents and then it kind of never gets done. So just making sure there's one person who files all of that as well. That's important because, the sponsor can be putting out new protocol versions and new documents. And it's important for someone to be kind of tuned into that. So that way you can document training appropriately and on time and kind of let the team know that new documents have come in. So um, if there's one or two people who are responsible for making sure it's updated and checking regularly, they'll also kind of catch those new documents to make sure everyone is in compliance with training and things like that. Version control, make sure that when you're setting up your TMF, all of the folders have, is labeled correctly, whether it's 1 through 5 or ABC, or just making sure everything is labeled the same way as well. So if you have a protocol and it's like the study name, the date of approval, the version number, making sure every protocol that comes after that is titled in the same way and that the versions are consistent. Um, it's really hard sometimes, especially in investigator initiated studies, when we're the ones creating CRFs or we're the ones creating guidance documents and something changes. Um, you have to, one, be able to track the changes, which is made easier with the electronic eTMF, but also be able to go back and see like what were we collecting before versus what we're collecting now. Um, and I see sometimes like with CRFs, things change or we're not collecting this blood work anymore. Um, but it's still on, you're still using that version because it's not versioned correctly, or I may pull a CRF that's old if I'm a coordinator and I'm going to go do a visit. If it's not labeled correctly, and then I collected blood that didn't need to be collected, or I did a procedure that didn't need to be done because I wasn't using the most updated version because it wasn't versioned. So important to make sure those are clean and consistent. Um, how the TMF would be made available to any auditors or monitors that come in. So um, a lot of the time when we're preparing for audits and monitoring, I feel like this is something that we kind of like stress about, like, oh, they requested, how do I get them access to this or that? So it's important to, kind of have that idea or those instructions up front. And you'll most of the time work with a sponsor on kind of what they need to be able to review those documents. Um, for audits, there are, a lot of guidelines and requirements on how we conduct them. I would, if you have an audit coming up or, someone reached out for one, I would contact School of Medicine, or if you're an SCCR, to help conduct those visits because it's important to document what you give to them and also be able to produce those documents quickly. So in preparation for the audit, we want to make sure our TMF is ready and we're able to give them the documents immediately when they ask for them. Is there another one after this? Okay. Effective QC. So I also recommend QCing your ETMF frequently, rather that's like monthly or quarterly, whatever works for your staff. But I find that this helps a lot with monitoring visits and auditors. You just feel more prepared and it's not kind of hectic when you have a monitoring visit or something coming up because you know you've been checking it frequently and everything is up to date. So I really, really recommend having a plan to do that on some cadence. Um, Having procedures in case an involved party closes down its business for some reason. So, if the sponsor closes, making sure that you have a plan or documentation for that, or if a study staff leaves, making sure you have procedures and guidance and trackers in place in your TMF to make sure you capture whatever you need in case someone leaves or things change. And then archiving and access to data after the study closes. Um, Usually this is something we kind of worry about later on, but it's important to have a plan. Where is the data and where is all of my documents going to live after the study closes? So things to think about um, when starting up your study and throughout. All right, we're about halfway there, so I'm gonna go a little quicker through these. ETMF systems, again, I mentioned a lot of us use electronic systems now. SCCR specifically uses Box for our TMFs. Again, we have a template on how it's supposed to be structured, and then our teams create the folders and file them accordingly. So I highly recommend Box. There's PHI safe folders, and there's also external shareable folders that works really well. School of Medicine has good guidance on how to share box folders with monitors or anyone who comes in. And it kind of goes through what steps they need and what needs to be accessed or what access is needed to be given with Box. So Box is very user friendly in terms of sharing and storage and being able to track documents. OneDrive is another option Stanford has, is I haven't seen many people use OneDrive, but it is also available. And then sponsors provide systems like Viva, um, Encore, things like that. If you're working with a sponsor, they usually provide those systems for you. There's a lot of new ones that are really good too. I think Stanford is looking into adapting some other electronic regulatory systems that are specifically for that purpose. So I would keep an eye out for that as well, if you're interested in doing that. I think that's going to be really great. And then some of the pros of using an electronic system is being able to search for documents. So instead of having to like go through a binder, being able to kind of just search for protocol version 3, it makes your time, or it makes the time a lot quicker and it's a lot more effective in that way. Being able to upload documents and submit them to sponsors or the IRB, they're already all on the computer electronic, so you don't have to scan them and then upload them if you need to submit them. We can sign electronically now as well, so it never has to be like printed out and then re-upload it to be able to submit it. So um, I highly recommend eTMF as well. Again, version control, we kind of went over this, and this gives you a little bit more guidance on that and how to version it. Once a final version is approved, it should be version 1. And then when any minor changes are made, we like to only change that last number. So like administrative changes, if a staff is changing, but nothing in the protocol actually changed, or like there's a PI change, it would be protocol version 1.2 or 3 or and etc. If substantial amendments were made to the protocol, then I would suggest versioning it to 2 and 3 and on and on if it's big changes to the protocol. It's essential that all users of control documents use the most updated versions of the protocol. Again, it's really important to keep them updated and versioned correctly so that we know we're using the most up-to-date. It's a good idea to keep a table in the front cover of the site files listing the current approved documents and their versions. So that way we know which documents we're using currently. Um, so electronic signature, this is another big topic that I get a lot. We have a few tools at Stanford available for electronic signature. There's Adobe Sign and Adobe Pro are the main ones that we use. The new electronic regulatory system that we're adopting also has Part 11 compliant signatures in it as well. So making sure that your signatures are Part 11 compliant is very important, especially for any regulatory documents that we sign. Um, they have to be Part 11 compliant, it has to be a unique signature, clearly indicates the name of the signer. There's a record of the date and time. It defines the meaning of the signature. It's linked to an electronic record, and it's in a software compliant with Part 11. So once you've signed a document electronically, this is what it should look like. And this is from Adobe Pro. So you have to go and set up your digital signature um, before you sign in Adobe Pro. So this is kind of confusing because, you can write with a pen in Adobe Pro and not do like an official electronic signature. Like I can just type Lisa Jones, but that's not Part 11 compliant. In order for it to be Part 11 compliant, it has to have this entire stamp on it saying, I reviewed this document, here's the date and time, and it has a unique ID and is able to be locked so that that document is Part 11 compliant. Adobe Sign is a very easy way that I recommend to do this because it automatically um, has this electronic signature component, and you don't have to like make sure you're doing that like you do in Adobe Pro. So if you don't have Adobe Sign, I would reach out and try and get that because it is very easy to use, but you can do it in Adobe Pro. But if you just sign with the pen or you type, that is not Part 11 compliant. And most regulatory documents have to be Part 11 compliant signed. Um, Files and archiving them, it's the responsibility of the PI to arrange the archiving of the research data. All study documents must be stored in a safe and secure confidential environment. So usually the requirement is behind 2 doors or behind 2 locks. So if they're stored in a binder in your study room, they should be locked in a cabinet behind a door that also needs access to get into. So 2 levels of access. And then, of course, if you're doing it electronically, only authorized staff should have access to that, whether it's like the Stanford SUNET authorization and there's another password or anything like that. So just making sure your documents aren't just living on your open computer is really important. Avoid leaving files laying around, especially for paper documents and on your computer. Like sometimes I download a document because I'm working on it and it's on my desktop. And then I would forget to make sure I file it because it's on my computer, right? But it's really important to make sure once you're done editing that document, it gets filed in the appropriate place. And then treat your source document like gold and ensure that you don't lose them or they get destroyed. And again, you need to keep them for 2 or more years. That includes medical notes that are applicable to the study, x-ray data, tissues, sample data, CRFs, anything that relates to the study that has study data on it needs to be make sure they're cared for, they're able to be tracked and in place and not destroyed. Awesome. Inspection readiness. So, what does it mean to be inspection ready? Um, a quality objective, objective is being able to operate at a level that is always ready for an inspection without requiring much preparation days leading up to the inspection. So, again, we went over earlier things that we should keep in mind when we're setting up our TMF and how we maintain it. So those are all key steps. And then some other tips to ensure that you're audit ready is to establish an audit inspection ready culture from the start. So again, preparing those documents, who is going to oversee them, and just making sure that we know as a team that they're important and we know why they're important. And just making sure that everyone is really in to make sure that that is happening. Again, define clear roles and responsibilities early. Develop an inspection strategy, SOP, or guidance. We do already have guidances, so I would highly recommend that you go and review inspection guidance. If you're an SCCR, you should have access to those or trained on them. And again, our quality team, that's what we're here for. We don't want you to have to go through inspections on your own. They can be scary. Again, preparing for them and being audit ready before that happens is a big part, but we're also here if you need help or guidance. Having all of your documents centralized ensures that you're inspection ready, being able to produce those documents quickly and knowing where they are to the inspectors. Um, Setting expectations and training staff. So even if I'm a coordinator and not in charge of the regulatory documents, I still know where the regulatory documents are, where I can find them, how they are supposed to be maintained and updated in case a staff member is out and we can have someone come in or someone leaves. So I know, I'm trained and I know where everything is and what needs to be updated. And then again, perform regular QCs, mock inspections if you need them, to make sure that you are audit ready. What are regulators looking for? So when someone comes and audits, they want to receive some form of access to the TMF. So again, I recommend kind of having a plan for that prior to having someone come and audit. You don't want to be like trying to fumble and get them access and they're like there waiting on documents. Um, a recent audit that we did, they like bought a thumb drive. So we were able to upload them to their thumb drive and then they uploaded it to their computer. But that required us to have like all of our documents electronically in a place to be able to upload and then um, put them on their drive in a way that was easily readable, accessible, and obtainable for the auditors as well. Be able to review TMF documents that tell a story of how the study has been conducted and how the TMF has been maintained. So, um, the auditors are looking at protocol deviations and documentation on why this ICF was collected 5 times, and there should be documents that kind of lay out things like that as well. So just making sure again that we have a well-maintained and detailed TMF because they're looking to be able to reconstruct the story of the trial from beginning to end. Um, easily accessing documents. Again, there's a 3 to 5 minute rule that the FDA auditors usually have. Beyond 5 minutes, they assume that you've either made alterations to the documents or you've created it, just now. So in order to avoid kind of any of that speculation or those issues, having the documents ready and being able to give them to them within 3 to 5 minutes is the best rule of thumb. And then they're also looking at PI and sponsor oversight. So the PI may not be the one, doing the day-to-day regulatory document maintenance, but, ultimately the study conduct is the PI's responsibility. So the auditors will look at the oversight of the PI. Is the TMF, have all of the documents been reviewed by the PI? And does he or she are they aware of, how the study is being conducted or how the documents are being maintained? And then documentation, good rule of thumb, if it's not documented, that means it did not happen. If there's no documentation, um, there's no way of, like, I can say I took someone's blood pressure and it was this, but if there's no source document to prove it, I could just be making up anything. So if you don't write it down, you don't enter it into the database and have source documentation to back it up, it did not happen. And then this is some inspection findings that are common, and we'll go over a few ways to kind of mitigate those. And Kira, let me know maybe 10 or 10 minutes before we need to wrap up, but we're almost done. So we've seen a lot of cases where documents could not be located in a timely manner. So a way to mitigate that is using an internal TMF index. Again, that table of contents, making sure you have that. Documents not filed according to the TMF index. So, it's easy to make a table of contents and then put it where you need to put it, but then you also have to organize those documents and make the folders and make sure the corresponding documents are in the folders. And then add clear guidance in the TMF. And in order to make sure documents are filed, increase frequencies of QC. Is also a way to mitigate that. Missing documents or missing versions of documents. So again, I mentioned earlier having a list of the current documents being implemented is a great way to mitigate that. And then using placeholders for documents. So if you know a new version of something is coming out, make a folder for that so you remember to file those things. Or even if you don't have, you're in the study startup and you don't have an ICF yet, or if you don't have a investigator brochure yet, still making those folders as placeholders so you know that, or you remember that I need to put these documents in this folder. Incomplete documents, including emails, so not having proper communications filed. A lot of the times I get, oh, we didn't do this procedure because the PI said that it was okay not to do it, but I don't have any communication or proof of that. Is a finding that happens a lot. Or, oh, we reviewed this AE, but we just did it in person and we didn't write anything down or anything like that. So that kind of all falls under incomplete documents and communications. And a way to mitigate that is a project management plan that includes standards for QC to make sure, someone's looking at it to make sure everything is able to be explained and there's proper documentation for things. Duplicate documents, I see a lot as well. Use an expected documents list like I mentioned before, and use placeholders to make sure we don't have the same file filed in there. multiple times. Documents are named incorrectly a lot of the time. So um, maybe in that expected document or in the table of contents, put, a file format or naming structure. So that way, when you file them, you know how to name them, or if someone else goes in into electronic, you can name them. Also, putting the file name convention in the manual of procedures is also a good way to make sure we're all filing and naming documents the same way. Um, File reviews not occurring per SOP. So if you make in your manual of procedures, you say that you're supposed to review the documents every month. And in this case, they did not do that. The way to mitigate that is making sure you have someone who is responsible for that, whether it's like outsourcing a file review. At SCCR, we have a monitoring team, which I am a part of, and we are responsible for reviewing those documents and making sure that the study team has everything filed in their binder, and it's not kind of just on them. So outsourcing a extra level of review is a great way to mitigate that, as well as internal QC teams. So if we are not your monitor, but we have auditors on our team as well, that you just want to come in and make sure that um, like maybe they're, better or have more availability to do that frequency or level of review, is ways to mitigate that. And just kind of look at that early. Like if it's 3 months to the study and you haven't gotten the chance to do a review, it should be like a signal that, okay, maybe we should get someone else in to do these reviews for us to make sure we're following our SOPs and our guidance, and our plan for review. And then large number of documents uploaded to an ETF upon inspection notice. So this is basically like I was saying before, the auditor comes, requests all these documents, and we have nothing. So creating documents during the inspection is a major finding. So just make sure you're uploading and keeping your documents updated in a timely manner. And document that review to make sure that you show that the ICF or the TMF is completed. I have recommended sites make the table of contents into like an Excel or a smart sheet, and then, kind of just check if it was reviewed and what the date was. So that way you have kind of a tracker to show when you've reviewed things, and making sure that we're not all of a sudden creating and uploading all of these documents when the time is needed. Other common errors: documents stored in the eTMF not related to that trial. So, for instance, when I monitor for a specific study, I'm going to ask for all of the CVs that um, are I'm going to ask for all of the CVs for the study staff who is on the site. I know a lot of departments kind of keep all of their CVs in one place, and then those usually don't get transferred to like the study specific folder. And then it's hard to like, give those documents when they're requested. So I highly recommend that, you have a study specific regulatory binder, and only the study staff for that study's CVs and qualifications are stored in that binder, and it's not just a big folder of everyone's documents. It also makes it easier for you when you need to share those documents with monitors or something. They're all just there. Common missing documents: HIPAA certifications. If you're doing research at Stanford, they require two research two HIPAA trainings. One is HIPAA privacy, and the other one is HIPAA for researchers. So those are both required by the School of Medicine, and they should be done yearly, both of them. So, and they are required to be in your binder for monitors or auditors to review. They're going to look for both of those. So if you have not done either one, please go and make sure both of them are completed. And I would also say just make sure you download all of them too. Again, keeping all of them in your binder will also trigger whoever's reviewing it to be like, oh, this person is missing, this document, or they need to go and do their training. It also helps. Samples of CRFs is a common missing document. The sponsor, when they change CRFs, they'll send you, the new CRFs, or they'll send you CRF templates. So if you're using REDCap, um, and you've built it, like investigator initiated, you need to make sure it's in production and you can have access to version control and change control, and make sure you're printing out those CRFs. So if once you set up your REDCap and you're ready to go, I would print all those CRFs and put them in your binder. And then anytime you make a change, you get rid of a procedure or you get rid of a lab that you don't need anymore, that's a new version of the CRFs. So make sure you print that out and or not print it out, you download it and you file it as well. And that'll just help for, auditors and monitors when they come in. If one version of the protocol required a lab and then you go in the database and you don't see that in the CRF, I can go and I can see, oh, it was a part of the CRF and then it got taken out because of so and so. And then you can also track, how that data will still be applicable after being taken away, because you have those templates. Lab documents, if you're using local labs, Stanford's labs, Kappa and CLIA certifications are online. It's important to have those um, filed as well. Lab ranges, I don't think Stanford shares their reference ranges anymore, but if you're using a central lab, make sure that you have those reference ranges filed in your binder. Reference ranges change sometimes really frequently. So just making sure you download those versions and put them into your binder so everyone is aware. Um, and there is a note to file or memo from the lab at Stanford that says like they're not sharing their reference ranges. So I would download that and put that into your regulatory binder as well. So that way, when the sponsor asks you, why don't you have that in here, you have the documentation to show them that why they're not there. And then a lot of people don't store their IRB submissions. I see a lot of people, they do their approvals pretty well, and the documents that were approved by the IRB, but the submissions are also important to see what was submitted when. So in e-protocol, once you anytime you can go in and there's a print view, and you can print the protocol out with comments or without comments. So all of those should be filed in your binder. So you want to see that whole modification page printed into and stored in your binder with the correct version and the dates submitted and things like that, as well as any documents that were submitted or approved and the approval letters. And then another common error is conflicting documentation. So we've seen people that have gotten married and they changed their name in Stanford's records and everywhere, and their name on the DOA was, their maiden name. But now their CV says a different last name or a different name on it. So those are examples of like conflicting documents that need to be updated, or like a medical license. Like now this person's name is different on their medical license, but on the DOA or on their financial disclosure form, it's different. So just making sure that that's also something you're thinking about when updating those documents. Expired documents is pretty self-explanatory. Medical license is one that's overlooked quite a bit. So just making sure you do get those from your investigators to file. CVs, they need to be signed and dated every 2 years. Um, IRB approvals, again, continuing reviews should be filed. And then certifications, the CLIA and the CAP, they do have to be renewed in a certain time frame. So making sure you have all those different versions of the CLIA and the CAP filed for how long you've been conducting the study. And then incomplete files, so just not having documents in folders without any kind of explanation or note to file. And then again, some documents being on site, some documents being electronic without having note to files or explanations. And then just not having a regulatory binder at all. You'd be surprised how many studies we come and monitor and they literally just don't have one set up. So please, please, please make sure that that is something that you're thinking about at the start of the trial and then, thinking about how to maintain it throughout the trial. So some key takeaways, preparation is key. Make sure you have a plan on how you're going to document your study and, who's going to be in charge of making sure it happens according to your plan. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. Not even if you're, you have the best memory in the world. There has to be a source documentation. It has to come from somewhere and be documented to show that it happened. Um, TMFs and studies and study documents are not one size fits all. If you look at the table of content example that we have and half of the documents aren't applicable to your study, that's totally fine and probably true. So that's why it's really important to review that plan. Make sure you update that table of contents to make sure it fits your study. It takes a village. Again, make sure you know who is going to update those documents. Make sure they have a backup person who's going to update those documents if you're not able to review because your team's at capacity with patient visits and other things like that, making sure you outsource someone to review those if you need to. So it takes up a lot of time. It's really tedious. It's not the part everyone likes to do, but it is really important. So just making sure we're all committed and on board with making sure we're audit ready and our documents are organized accordingly. Um, awesome. I think that is it. It looks like we got about 5 minutes or so. If anybody has any questions, put them in the chat or unmute yourself.
I did just put a note in the chat about our next SCCR GCP workshop. So this is going to be a collaboration with Jennifer Brown from the Clinical Research Quality Office, Sarah Dottie from RMG, and Allison Gerger from the IRB. So they are going to do a joint presentation on April 11th from 12 to 1:30 on short form consent. So I've received a lot of questions about short form consent. They're going to talk about not only the regulations and the changes, recent changes from the FDA and how that looks from the Stanford IRB, but also some really how to operationalize those changes as well as thinking about budget considerations. That's why Sarah's involved. So we welcome you to attend that. Again, it's very similar setup to this class. We'll also be recording that, but please register at that link. And Doran, we have a couple minutes. So if there's any other questions, please direct them to Doran.
Well, thanks everyone for coming and listening to me go on about the eTMF. I know regulatory is not everyone's favorite, so
But so very important.
Yes.
Well, thanks for coming today, and let us know if anything comes up. But I will be sending out an email with the slides as well as a link to an evaluation. We would appreciate you taking 1 to 2 minutes to complete that and let us know your feedback as well as any other ideas for topics for our calendar for this year. I'll stop the recording.